So there I was, 13 years into this relationship with Terrence, watching him get all excited because I mentioned wanting to take up tennis. Like, finally, right? The man's been on my case for months about finding a hobby, saying I need something that's just for me, something to help with all the stress from running my business. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Between managing employees who can barely tie their own shoes and dealing with clients who think they know better than someone who's been in this industry for over a decade, I was about ready to lose my mind. So when I saw that the country club was offering lessons, I figured why not? I deserve something nice after everything I do for this family. The kids were actually pretty supportive too. Mason, who's 4 and thinks everything mommy does is amazing, kept asking if he could come watch me play tennis like the people on TV. Kayla, my 6-year-old drama queen, immediately wanted to know if she could get lessons too, because apparently everything has to be about her. But whatever, at least they weren't whining about mommy being gone for a few hours each week. Terrence seemed genuinely happy that I was doing something for myself, which should have been sweet, but honestly it just reminded me how little he actually pays attention to what I need on a daily basis. My first lesson was with this coach named Cole, and right away I could tell he was different from what I expected. Most tennis instructors at these fancy clubs are either crusty old men who smell like mothballs or uptight women who act like they're training for Wimbledon. But Cole was young, maybe 21, and actually seemed interested in teaching someone who'd never held a racket before. He was patient when I kept missing the ball completely, and he didn't make me feel like an idiot when I asked basic questions about scoring. Plus, he actually listened when I mentioned how stressful work had been lately, instead of just nodding and changing the subject like some people I know. After a few weeks, Cole and I started texting about scheduling and technique tips. Nothing weird, just normal instructor-student communication. But I'll admit, it was refreshing to have someone ask how my day went and actually wait for an answer. When I'd tell him about some crisis at work or how exhausting it was juggling everything at home, he'd respond with actual thoughts and advice, instead of just grunting or suggesting I should probably get more sleep. It felt like having an adult conversation for once. Things started getting more friendly when Cole mentioned he was having trouble with some personal stuff. Family drama, money issues, typical young person problems. I found myself offering advice, and before I knew it, we were having these long text conversations about life and goals and all the things you don't usually discuss with your tennis instructor. He was sweet, calling me wise, and saying he wished more people his age had my perspective on things. It was nice to feel appreciated for my brain instead of just my ability to keep everyone else's life running smoothly. Right before Christmas, Cole suggested we grab dinner after a lesson to continue a conversation we'd been having about career planning. It seemed perfectly innocent. I mean, I'm 40 years old, with 2 kids and a business to run, and he's barely old enough to drink legally. What could possibly happen? We went to this little Italian place near the club, and honestly, it was the most relaxed I'd felt in months. No one was asking me to find their shoes or fix their problems or make decisions about things they should be handling themselves. Just good food and conversation with someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We ended up meeting one other time before Christmas, just for coffee. And Cole mentioned how much he enjoyed talking to someone who understood the pressure of having real responsibilities. He said most people his age were still living off their parents and had no idea what it was like to actually work for everything you have. It was validating, you know? Here's this kid who could probably date any 20-something airhead he wanted. And he's choosing to spend time with me because he values my intelligence and experience. Christmas week was absolutely insane. I had 3 major client presentations to finish. The kids were bouncing off the walls with holiday excitement, and Terrence was being his usual unhelpful self, acting like his job teaching high school somehow made him too important to deal with any of the actual holiday preparations. By Wednesday evening, I was ready to scream. The house was a disaster. I still had shopping to finish, and I'd barely eaten anything all day because I was too busy making sure everyone else's needs were met. That's when Cole texted asking if I wanted to grab a quick bite and decompress. Honestly, it sounded like exactly what I needed. I told Terrence I was going out for food and would be back soon, which wasn't even a lie. That's exactly what I was planning to do. But when I got to the restaurant, Cole had already ordered us a bottle of wine, and after the day I'd had, I wasn't about to say no. We talked about everything: my business stress, his family situation, how hard it is to find people who really understand you. The wine helped me relax for the first time in weeks, and Cole was being so sweet, telling me how amazing I was and how lucky my family was to have someone so capable taking care of everything. I guess we stayed later than I planned, and maybe I had more wine than I should have. But it felt so good to just be Bailey for a few hours instead of mommy or honey or boss or whatever other role everyone needed me to play. When we finally decided to leave, I was definitely tipsy, and Cole offered to make sure I got to my car safely. We sat in my car for a while, still talking, and I remember thinking how nice it was to have someone actually care about my feelings for once. The next thing I know, there's this loud knocking on my car window, and it's Terrence looking absolutely furious. Apparently it was 5:30 in the morning, which honestly shocked me because it didn't feel like we'd been sitting there that long. Cole was still with me, and I could tell Terrence was making all sorts of assumptions about what was happening. The whole thing was embarrassing and awkward, and I felt like a teenager getting caught sneaking out, which was ridiculous because I'm a grown woman who should be able to have dinner with a friend without getting the third degree. The ride home was tense as hell. Terrence kept asking what I was thinking and why I was out so late and what exactly was going on with my tennis instructor. I tried to explain that Cole was like a kid brother to me, that we were just talking, but Terrence was being dramatic and acting like he'd caught me planning to run away or something. I was honest about having dinner with Cole and mentioned we'd met for coffee once before, because I'm not a liar and I had nothing to hide. But Terrence was acting like this was some huge betrayal instead of just two friends having a conversation. When we got home, Terrence demanded to see my phone, which was insulting and controlling, but I was tired and wanted this whole thing to be over, so I deleted the text conversations with Cole first. Not because anything inappropriate had happened, but because I knew Terrence would misinterpret perfectly innocent messages and make them into something they weren't. He was already being irrational about the situation, and I didn't need him analyzing every friendly comment and turning it into evidence of some imaginary affair. For the next few days, Terrence was cold and distant, barely speaking to me except to make passive-aggressive comments about trust and honesty. He insisted I stop taking lessons with Cole and find a different instructor, which felt like being punished for something I didn't even do. But I agreed because I wanted our family to get back to normal. And honestly, it wasn't worth fighting about. If switching coaches would make Terrence feel better about his own insecurities, fine. I'd be the bigger person and accommodate his jealousy. The next few months were tense. Terrence was watching everything I did, questioning where I was going and who I was with, treating me like some kind of criminal who couldn't be trusted. It was exhausting and insulting, especially since I'd done exactly what he asked and found a new tennis instructor. But apparently that wasn't enough. He still brought up that night whenever we had any kind of disagreement, using it as ammunition to make me feel guilty for wanting to have a life outside of serving everyone else's needs. My new coach was fine, I guess. Professional, competent, boring as watching paint dry. She focused purely on technique and never asked about anything beyond tennis, which was probably what Terrence preferred. But it made the lessons feel like just another chore on my endless to-do list instead of the stress relief they used to be. I found myself missing those conversations with Cole, missing having someone who actually seemed interested in me as a person, rather than just as a wife and mother and business owner who existed to make everyone else's life easier. By May, I was feeling pretty resentful about the whole situation. Here I was, doing everything Terrence had demanded, being the perfect wife who only talked to approved people about approved topics, and he was still treating me like I was one mistake away from destroying our family. It was insulting and unfair, especially since I'd been nothing but honest about what happened that night. Yeah, maybe I stayed out later than planned and had more wine than I should have, but I wasn't sneaking around or lying about where I was. I texted him exactly where I was going. Then my new coach got sick and had to cancel several lessons in a row. The front desk called to ask if I wanted to reschedule or if I'd be okay working with a substitute instructor for a few sessions. When they mentioned it would be Cole, I figured it would be awkward to refuse. That would just draw more attention to the situation and make it seem like something inappropriate had happened between us when it hadn't. Besides, I'm an adult who should be able to handle a professional tennis lesson with someone I used to know without it being a big deal. Seeing Cole again was actually really nice. He asked how I'd been and seemed genuinely interested in the answer, which was refreshing after months of feeling like everyone around me only cared about what I could do for them. When I mentioned how stressful things had been at work and at home, he was sympathetic and understanding, reminding me why I'd enjoyed our conversations in the first place. After the lesson, he suggested grabbing coffee to catch up properly. And honestly, it sounded like exactly what I needed. That coffee turned into dinner. And dinner turned into a few more dates over the following weeks. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't some calculated affair or anything dramatic like that. It was just nice to spend time with someone who made me feel interesting and appreciated, instead of taken for granted. Cole would ask about my business and actually listen to my answers. He'd remember things I'd mentioned in previous conversations and follow up on them. When I talked about feeling overwhelmed or underappreciated, he didn't just shrug it off or suggest I should be grateful for what I have. Things got more serious when Cole and I kissed after one of our dinners. It wasn't planned or anything. It just happened. And honestly, it felt amazing to have someone look at me like I was desirable instead of just useful. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone actually want to spend time with me, rather than just expecting me to be available whenever they needed something. Cole made me feel like a woman again, instead of just a mom and a wife and a boss who existed to solve everyone else's problems. When I had to travel for business in late spring, Cole mentioned how much he'd miss our conversations while I was gone. Almost without thinking, I suggested he come with me. The company was paying for a nice hotel by the lake, and it would be fun to have someone to explore the area with when I wasn't stuck in meetings. I offered to pay for his plane ticket, which wasn't a big deal since the business was doing well, and I spend money on much stupider things all the time. Terrence certainly never hesitated to buy whatever gadgets or sports equipment caught his eye. The trip was incredible. During the day, I handled my business meetings and presentations, feeling confident and successful, and reminded of how good I am at what I do. In the evenings, Cole and I would explore the lake town, trying different restaurants and just enjoying each other's company. It felt like being on vacation with someone who actually wanted to be there with me, instead of someone who was just going through the motions of family time, while obviously wishing he was somewhere else. That's when things became physical between us. It felt natural and right, like the logical progression of everything that had been building between us for months. Cole was attentive and passionate in a way that made me remember what it felt like to be wanted rather than just needed. I'm not proud of cheating on Terrence, but I'm also not going to pretend I didn't enjoy feeling desired and appreciated for once. We took another trip together a few weeks later, and again, I paid for Cole's ticket. Some people might think that's weird, but I make good money, and he's still getting started in his career. It seemed natural to invest in someone who made me happy, especially since I spend plenty of money on things for Terrence and the kids without thinking twice about it. Why shouldn't I spend some of my hard-earned money on something that actually brought me joy? For a few months, I felt like I was living two different lives, and honestly, I was handling it pretty well. At home, I was still the same reliable Bailey, taking care of the kids and managing the household and keeping my business running smoothly. But I also had this other part of my life where I got to feel young and exciting and valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. It was the best of both worlds, and I was managing to keep everything balanced without hurting anyone. I thought I was being careful about keeping the two parts of my life separate, but apparently I wasn't as discreet as I believed. Terrence started acting suspicious again, asking more questions about my schedule and checking up on me in ways that felt invasive and controlling. I figured he was just being paranoid because of what happened at Christmas. So I tried to be extra careful about covering my tracks and making sure there was no evidence of my relationship with Cole that could be misinterpreted. But somehow, Terrence found out anyway. I'm still not entirely sure how. Maybe he went through my phone when I wasn't paying attention, or maybe he saw something on social media that I forgot to hide. Either way, he confronted me during what was supposed to be a relaxing holiday weekend, presenting me with some kind of written letter, like he was serving me with legal papers or something. The whole thing was so dramatic and over the top, like he'd been planning this confrontation for weeks. The letter laid out everything he knew about my relationship with Cole. The trips, the money I'd spent, even details about our text conversations that I thought I'd deleted. It was clear he'd been investigating me, like some kind of detective, which felt like a huge violation of trust and privacy. Instead of talking to me like an adult about his concerns, he'd been sneaking around gathering evidence to use against me, which was manipulative and unfair. When I tried to explain my side of things, Terrence wasn't interested in hearing about the loneliness I'd been feeling or the stress I was under, or how nice it was to have someone actually pay attention to me for once. He just wanted to be angry and righteous and make me into the villain of his story. Finally, I just said, fine, you're right, you win. Because what was the point of trying to have a rational conversation with someone who'd already made up his mind about everything? Terrence announced he wanted a 30-day separation to think about whether our marriage could be saved, which seemed excessive and dramatic. But whatever. If he needed to throw a tantrum and punish me for finding happiness somewhere else, I guess that was his choice. I found a place to stay and tried to explain to Mason and Kayla why Mommy wouldn't be living at home for a while without making Daddy look like the bad guy, even though he was the one making this whole situation way more complicated than it needed to be. I've offered to go to therapy, both individual and couples counseling, because I'm willing to work on our relationship if that's what it takes. I even told Terrence he could have his own hall pass if it would make him feel better about what happened with Cole. I mean, fair is fair, right? But he acts like I suggested something disgusting instead of recognizing that I'm trying to be reasonable and find a solution that works for everyone. Now I'm sitting here 20-something days into this ridiculous separation, wondering if Terrence is ever going to stop being dramatic and start acting like an adult who wants to save his family. The kids keep asking when I'm coming home, and I keep having to make excuses for why Daddy needs some space right now. My business is suffering because I'm distracted and stressed about this whole situation. And meanwhile, Terrence gets to play the victim and act like he's the only one who's been hurt by any of this. I know I made some mistakes, and I'm willing to admit that. Maybe I shouldn't have gotten involved with Cole, and maybe I should have been more upfront with Terrence about feeling neglected and unappreciated. But it's not like I set out to hurt anyone or destroy our family. I was just trying to find some happiness and fulfillment in my life. And honestly, if Terrence had been paying better attention to my needs, none of this would have happened in the first place. The whole thing is just frustrating because I feel like I'm being punished way more severely than the situation warrants. Yeah, I had an affair, but it's not like I was planning to leave my family or anything crazy like that. It was just something that made me feel good about myself for a while. And now everyone's acting like I committed some unforgivable sin instead of just being human and making some poor choices when I was feeling lonely and overwhelmed. I'm hoping Terrence comes to his senses before this 30-day deadline he's created, because honestly, this whole separation is harder on the kids than it is on either of us. Mason keeps asking if mommy and daddy are getting divorced, and Kayla's been having nightmares and acting out at school. If Terrence really cared about our family, he'd stop being so stubborn and prideful and work with me to fix this instead of dragging it out and making everyone miserable. But I guess we'll see what happens when his little deadline arrives. Maybe he'll realize that 13 years and 2 children are worth more than his wounded ego. Maybe he'll remember that I'm still the same person who's been taking care of him and our family all these years, and that one mistake shouldn't erase everything good we've built together. Or maybe he'll keep being dramatic and throw away our entire life together because he can't forgive me for finding someone who actually made me feel valued and appreciated. Either way, I've done everything I can to fix this situation. I've offered therapy, I've offered compromise, I've even offered to let him have his own affair if that's what it takes to make things even between us. If that's not enough for him, then maybe we were never as compatible as I thought we were. Maybe he's just not mature enough to handle the kind of complex adult relationship that sometimes requires forgiveness and understanding instead of just blame and punishment. All I know is that I refuse to spend the rest of my life apologizing for wanting to be happy. I refuse to pretend that I don't deserve to feel appreciated and desired and valued for who I am. And I refuse to accept that I'm somehow a terrible person for finding those things with someone other than my husband when my husband wasn't providing them himself. If Terrence can't understand that, then maybe we're both better off starting over with people who can actually meet our needs.